Hello everyone. This is a video on making connections in compound sentences using our comma, semicolon, and colons. If you had a hard time grasping it after last week's session, this is a second opportunity to look at that. And I've created an analogy that may help explain this a bit more. So if you are writing a quality paper, you want to create longer, more sophisticated sentences, what are you supposed to do? Well, you need to find a way to combine sentences. For example, the work that the boss requested was reasonable and important. That's one idea. And you're going to add that to another idea. We simply did not have enough time to complete it prior to his departure for New York. And you'll find that you have different ways of combining these two sentences. Those are the semicolon, comma, and the semicolon, commas, and colons. And you'll need conjunctions for most of those. This is actually a comic from back in my days, a conjunction junction. What's your function? If you want any old retro trivia, go look it up. But I want to have you consider an analogy. For your television, this very outdated model of television, or your more recent version of television to work, you've got to have an electrical cord. Now let's just say that your dog comes along, gets a little hungry, and starts chewing through the cord. You laugh and say this would never happen. I actually had a dog that chewed through a phone cord back in the days when phones were corded and the phone ceased to work. So let's just say that there's a misconnection with your television and you want it to work. You need to connect two pieces of the wire. Let's say that your dog has chewed through it and you've got this piece of the wire and this piece of the wire. And these are comparable to sentences in the analogy. You want to connect those two pieces. And you want to do it correctly, because if you make a mistake, there's going to be consequences. And in English, those consequences would not be life or death or electrocution. They would simply be someone doesn't understand what you're trying to say. So one thing you could do is just splice those wires back together, just like you can create in English an error called a comma splice. And in the quizzes last week, a lot of people had a hard time recognizing these, probably because many people in our society use comma splices on a regular basis, but there are times when comma splices create some confusion. So you could just splice them together, but they're not going to hold indefinitely. Like if you splice together the wires on your television set and then your 7-year-old brother came tearing through the room on his scooter and accidentally hit the cord, it would probably rip it apart and your electrical tape would be frayed all over the place. And similarly, when you have English sentences, you're going to find that certain errors may complicate things a bit. So these are examples of comma splices in English. And I had my 11-year-old son helping me with a couple of these ideas. Minions are awesome. They serve Gru in the movie Despicable Me. Having a comma only between them, that is an error. That is a comma splice error. It's comparable to just twisting your wires together. Dancing Dave sings and dances, hence the name. He is popular among kids. With a comma between them, that is an error called a comma splice, incorrect as it is. Another example of an incorrect sentence. Graduation requirements have changed in the past decades, comma, students are now required to take more math and science courses. Just a comma here, just like twisting wires together, it doesn't hold together, and you need more to connect it. Or, make your career choice carefully, you will dedicate significant time and energy to your job. With just a comma, again, this is a comma splice. It's getting a little redundant, but the point is that you want to use the appropriate connectors. If you had your television set and you had two wires and you're trying to get them connected, if you didn't use the appropriate connectors, you wouldn't have as much stability there. And some of you who have worked maybe on cars or on actual electrical devices may recognize these. But our connecting words in English are the analogy. So, when you do them correctly, this is how your sentences are going to look. Minions are awesome, comma, and they serve Gru in the movie Despicable Me. Or, Dancing Dave sings and dances a lot, semicolon, thus he is quite popular among kids. Or, graduation requirements have changed in the past decades, semicolon. Students are now required to take more math and science courses. And you can actually use a semicolon without any kind of conjunction there. You can't use a comma that way, but you can use a semicolon just between two ideas. And lastly, Make your career choice carefully, comma, for you will dedicate significant time and energy to your job. So these are the appropriate connectors that you are using to put sentence 1 and sentence 2 together. There are 3 ways to connect those sentences properly. You remember these from last week. Comma and fanboys, that's for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, only. You can only use these conjunctions with a comma. You can also use a semicolon and a conjunctive adverb, and you can think of conjunction, you can think of conjoined twins. The idea is you are joining things using an adverb like, however, otherwise, consequently, those types of words, and there's a long list of them. And the third option is the colon, which is, I think, less confusing and fewer people had problems with it on the test, but it deserves recognition as an option for joining sentences. So, looking at commas first, remember that a comma must have a conjunction to connect those 2 sentences. Otherwise, you do have a comma splice and an error that could confuse your reader. A comma has to be joined with for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. I should offer extra credit for those people who can say that 10 times fast. Those are your conjunctions. So you'd have a sentence like this, very current topic. Police brutality has received considerable media attention, comma, recent protests around the nation have drawn attention to this concern. This is an error as it is, so you need to add a conjunction. You've got a comma, you have to have a conjunction to go with it, and in this case, and is appropriate. Another example. The semester is almost over, comma, we still have 2 weeks left. And it's a little bit less than 2 weeks by the time you get to this video. Comma between 2 sentences. This is incorrect. This is a comma splice. You need to have a conjunction with that comma, so we'll use the one but. It's almost over, but we still have 2 weeks left, whether you consider that good news or bad news. And one last example. Please remember that any of these sentences that I create are not meant as my opinion, and there's some of these issues are more controversial than others. Please remember this is not necessarily my opinion. This is the kind of sentence you might be writing in your paper. Gun control is absolutely necessary, comma. Few politicians have the strength of character to take a stand against oppositional constituents. Putting a comma between 2 sentences, bad, don't do it, comma splice. Instead, add a conjunction like yet. Any of these fanboy friends of yours, comma plus these conjunctions only. You cannot substitute other conjunctions here, just these. So, take a moment to review and practice. Okay, let's go back and look at semicolons again. If a comma has to go with fanboys, a semicolon must go with a conjunctive adverb if it's going to have some kind of conjunction. Remember, you can put a semicolon by itself between 2 sentences, but if you're going to use a conjunction, these are the words that you need to use. Semicolon plus a word like however, otherwise, in fact, similarly, thus, moreover, nevertheless, also, likewise, and these are all followed by a comma. Here's some other examples with that. Police brutality has received considerable media attention, semicolon, recent protests across the nation have drawn attention to this concern. And the conjunction you might want to add is therefore. In fact, there are some questions on standardized tests, ACTs, etc., that ask you to figure out which conjunctive adverb is the most appropriate for that sentence, and they're really testing your comprehension with a question like that. A quick reminder, this therefore after the semicolon is lowercase. A few of you fell for those wrong answers on the quiz. And then when you're finished with that conjunctive adverb, you need a comma after it, and then you can proceed to the rest of your sentence. Another example, the sentence, this semester is almost over, semicolon, we still have 2 weeks left, and you could put a word like nonetheless, we still have 2 weeks left. This is the good news if you're behind. Again, lowercase letter and a comma afterwards. Gun control is absolutely necessary, semicolon, and then we add the conjunction, however, few politicians have the strength of character to take a stand. That's politicians. I'm a little cynical. So you have the lowercase h again and the comma after it. So semicolon, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, and then a comma. Once again, take a couple of moments to review and practice these types of sentences. Okay, a couple of quick reminders when you're comparing commas and semicolons. To connect them, you've got a comma, and that comma cannot be used alone or else you have an error. No, don't do it. Don't put a comma alone between two sentences. You need to have a conjunction with your comma. And that actually tells the reader that this is not like a non-essential phrase type comma. It tells the reader that we have a different idea coming up. And that's why this is so important. And remember, you cannot use a comma with conjunctive adverbs. You can't say your first idea, comma, however, comma. You can't say your first idea, comma, otherwise, comma. You have to use the fanboys with your comma. And with a semicolon, you can use a semicolon without a conjunction. If you're going to use a conjunction, you need a conjunctive adverb. That's the however, otherwise, subsequently, consequently, similarly, comparatively, all of those words and hence adverbs. And remember, you cannot use a semicolon with fanboys. You can't have your first sentence semicolon, but, and then the second sentence. You have to use the conjunctive adverbs if you're going to use a semicolon. And if you're going to use a comma, you need to use the fanboys. Those are the rules. I didn't make them. I just teach them. Once again, take some time to review and practice the difference between these sentences. Okay, our last topic, again, just to review the colon that can go before two different things. One is a quotation, and this may be a little bit different than dialogue in a play. This is if you're using a quotation that explains what you, the author, are otherwise saying. Or you can use a colon before something that really is the main idea that you want to drive home to your reader. So a colon goes with a quotation, a dependent clause, which is not a complete sentence, or an independent clause. For example, the research points to one conclusion. The planet is indeed getting warmer. So we can talk about all the global warming, global cooling, and we're having a really cold winter, we're having a big hot winter, but the research is going to tell us one very important thing. That's what I want to emphasize, so I use a colon. And after that colon, if you have a complete sentence, you can either capitalize it or not capitalize it. Totally up to you. Again, you can use that colon with a dependent clause or even just a couple of words. So in this one, the research points to one conclusion, global warming. And this is not a complete sentence by itself, but you can still put a colon in here to let your reader know this is an important idea. Pay attention. This is the colon saying pay attention. This idea is important, reader. And as a side note, you as a reader can use the strategy of recognizing colons so that you have a better understanding in complicated texts. And one last example. In addressing a seeming shift in papal doctrine, Pope Francis responded succinctly. And I want to give a quotation in this. So I use a colon here before my quotation. God is not afraid of new things. And again, in dialogue, you can use commas. You know, she said softly, comma, whatever. But in a place where you want to emphasize a point or provide a quotation in like a nonfiction text, the colon is going to go before your quotation. Now go ahead and review and practice this idea, the use of the colon. All right. Hopefully that clarified things a little bit after last week. Let's do some additional practice and apply it to your writing. Thanks for listening.